What if Mary Magdalene was not merely a devoted follower of Jesus, but was herself initiated into an ancient mystery tradition that predated Christianity by thousands of years? A lineage of women who carried in their blood the capacity to channel dragon consciousness. And what if the child she bore after the crucifixion was not just Jesus's biological heir, but the continuation of a sacred bloodline that united the Christ mysteries with the dragon mysteries, creating a fusion of wisdom that the early church fathers understood would make institutional authority obsolete because it granted direct access to divine consciousness without need for priestly mediation. In the south of France, in a region where legends speak of Mary Magdalene arriving by boat after fleeing persecution in Jerusalem, there exists a network of caves beneath the mountains that no archaeological survey has fully mapped, chambers connected by passages that seem to follow patterns that are not random but intentional, tracing symbols across kilometers of underground space that can only be perceived when viewed from above. And in the deepest of these chambers is a sealed vault that local tradition claims contains the true gospel of Mary Magdalene, the teaching she brought from the East, and that her descendants preserved through generations of persecution. In the winter of 2022, a scholar of comparative mysticism named Dr. Sophia Brennan was researching the Black Madonna statues that appeared throughout southern France when she noticed something that centuries of pilgrims and academics had apparently missed. The locations of the major Black Madonna shrines, when plotted on a map, formed a pattern that she recognized from her study of geomancy and sacred geometry. They traced the outline of a dragon in flight, its head oriented toward the Mediterranean and its tail extending into the Pyrenees. The dragon's heart, the center point of the pattern, corresponded to a mountain called Bougarach, a peak that local legends claimed was hollow and that served as a gathering place for beings who were not quite human, guardians of knowledge that predated recorded history. Sophia traveled to Bougarach and spent weeks exploring the mountain and interviewing locals who spoke in hushed tones about caves that appeared and disappeared, about lights seen moving beneath the ground, about women who still gathered in secret to perform rituals that their great-grandmothers had taught them, ceremonies that honored both the Christian Mary and something older, something they called the Dragon Mother, who had walked the earth in ancient times and who had chosen certain women to carry her consciousness forward through the ages. An elderly woman finally agreed to guide Sophia into the caves, but only after Sophia had submitted to a kind of interview that felt less like conversation and more like initiation. Questions designed to probe not what she knew intellectually, but who she was spiritually, whether her intentions were pure, and whether she could be trusted with knowledge that had been protected at the cost of countless lives. They descended through an opening that was concealed behind a waterfall, following passages that wound through the mountain's interior in spirals that seemed to mirror the double helix structure of DNA, and the old woman explained that the pattern was not coincidence but design, that the caves themselves were a teaching, a three-dimensional text that encoded the secret of the dragon bloodline for those who had learned to read with more than their eyes. They reached a chamber where the walls were covered with paintings that had to be thousands of years old, images that showed women with serpents coiled around their bodies, women whose eyes blazed with light that was painted in pigments that still glowed faintly in the darkness, women who stood between worlds with 1 foot on earth and 1 foot in sky, embodying the union of matter and spirit that the dragon represented. And in the center of the chamber was a stone altar, and resting upon it was a codex bound in leather that had been preserved through some means that Sophia could not identify, protected from decay by the specific conditions of the cave, or perhaps by something less material, an energetic seal that the old woman had to deactivate through a sequence of tones that she sang in a language Sophia did not recognize. When the seal released, Sophia felt a shift in the atmosphere of the cave, as though something that had been held in suspension was suddenly free to move, and she approached the codex with a sense of reverence that had nothing to do with academic interest and everything to do with soul recognition, the feeling of encountering something she had been searching for across lifetimes. The text was written in Greek, with sections in Aramaic, and in a script that resembled Egyptian hieratic, and it identified itself as the testament of Miriam of Magdala, written in her own hand during the years she spent in southern France after fleeing persecution in Jerusalem. And it began with words that immediately signaled this was not a conventional gospel, but something far more dangerous to Orthodox Christianity. I write this for my daughters, and for the daughters who will come after, for those who carry in their blood the mark of the dragon, the lineage that predates all religions and that will survive them all, because it is not based on belief, but on direct transmission of consciousness from teacher to student, from mother to daughter, from one who has awakened the dragon within to one who is ready to begin that awakening. Mary explained that she had been initiated into the dragon mysteries in Egypt, where she had studied with priestesses who traced their lineage back to the time of Isis and beyond, to the age when the goddess was understood not as a being to worship, but as a state of consciousness to embody. These priestesses taught that the dragon was the Western name for what the Eastern traditions called Kundalini, the serpent power that coiled at the base of the spine and that could rise through the energy centers of the body to produce enlightenment, the union of individual consciousness with cosmic consciousness that was the true meaning of salvation. Not rescue from sin by external savior, but awakening to the divinity that had always lived within. I met Yeshua, Mary wrote, using the Hebrew name for Jesus, when he came to Egypt seeking the same teachings I sought, and we recognized each other immediately as souls who had been preparing across many lifetimes for a specific mission, to demonstrate the possibility of the sacred marriage, the union of masculine and feminine principles within consciousness that produces the wholeness the Greeks called the hieros gamos. We trained together under the same teachers, learning the practices that activate the dragon power, and we became partners not just in teaching, but in the deepest sense, our energies woven together in a bond that death could not sever. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Mary described the years of Jesus' ministry in ways that contradicted the canonical Gospels, portraying him not as the sole teacher with disciples who merely listened, but as part of a partnership where she taught the women as he taught the men, where both contributed to a unified teaching that sought to restore the balance between masculine and feminine that had been lost when patriarchy had overthrown the goddess. Religions. And she revealed that Jesus had not preached celibacy, but had demonstrated through his relationship with her that sexuality, when practiced consciously as a spiritual discipline, was one of the most powerful methods for activating the dragon consciousness, for generating the energy that could be channeled into healing, teaching, and transforming reality itself. After his death, Mary continued, when I carried his child in my womb, I understood that what we had created together was not just a biological heir, but a new template for human consciousness, a fusion of the Christ awareness that Yeshua had embodied with the dragon consciousness that I carried. And this child, my daughter, whom I named Sarah, was the first of a new lineage. Children who would be born with capacities that others would have to spend lifetimes developing, who would carry the awakened dragon from birth, and who would serve as seeds for the evolution of the entire species. The Testament explained that Mary had fled to southern France with Sarah and with other women disciples who had also learned the dragon mysteries, and together they had established a community that continued the teaching, initiating women into the practices and identifying those who carried the genetic markers that indicated potential for full activation of the dragon consciousness. These markers were passed through the maternal line, encoded in the mitochondrial DNA that every child inherited exclusively from their mother. And the women who carried the strongest markers were trained to become the next generation of teachers, the dragon mothers who would preserve the lineage through centuries of persecution that were prophesied to come. The church that will be built on Yeshua's name will not be the church he intended, Mary prophesied with devastating accuracy. It will be taken over by men who fear the feminine, who cannot tolerate the idea that women might have direct access to the divine, who will declare that only through male priests can the sacred be accessed. They will erase me from the story or make me into a whore, will declare that Yeshua was celibate and that the sacred marriage is heresy, will hunt the dragon mothers and kill our children, trying to extinguish the bloodline that proves their authority is false. But they will not succeed, because the dragon cannot be killed, only driven underground, and there it will wait, coiled and patient, until the age when the feminine can rise again without being immediately destroyed. Sophia read through the night, absorbing Mary's instructions for the practices that activated the dragon consciousness, techniques that combined breathwork and meditation with specific movements that traced spirals through space, generating vortices of energy that connected the practitioner's body with the Earth's electromagnetic field and with the cosmic energies that flowed from the galactic center. And she read Mary's description of the bloodline's role in human evolution, how the children born to dragon mothers carried genetic variations that made them natural bridges between the old consciousness of separation and the emerging consciousness of unity, how they were designed to be the teachers and healers who would guide humanity through the transition that was prophesied to come when the age of Pisces gave way to the age of Aquarius. The Testament concluded with specific prophecies about when and how the dragon bloodline would be revealed, signs that Sophia recognized as manifesting in her own time: the collapse of patriarchal structures, the rising of women into positions of power, the rediscovery of goddess spirituality, the increasing numbers of children being born with heightened sensitivity and psychic abilities. When these signs appear, Mary wrote, know that the time of hiding is ending and the time of revelation is beginning, and those who carry the dragon blood will feel the stirring within them, a restlessness that will not be satisfied by the offerings of the conventional world, a calling to remember and reclaim and restore what was lost when the bloodline was forced into shadow. Sophia understood with absolute clarity that she was one of those carriers, that the dreams she had been having since childhood of flying on dragon's back were not fantasies, but memories encoded in her cells, ancestral experiences passed down through the maternal line that connected her directly to Mary Magdalene and to the dragon mothers who had come before. She began practicing the techniques that the Testament described, and she felt capacities awakening that she had suppressed her entire life, trying to fit into a world that had no framework for understanding what she was experiencing. She could perceive energy fields, could sense the flow of consciousness through living systems, could feel the earth itself as a vast dragon whose breath moved through the electromagnetic grid that connected all sacred sites. She gathered women who also felt the calling, who carried the restlessness that Mary had described, who sensed that they were part of something ancient that was being reborn. Together, they formed a new community of dragon mothers, not trying to recreate the past, but bringing the ancient wisdom forward in forms appropriate to the modern age, teaching the practices while also documenting them scientifically, demonstrating through measurable changes in brain activity and energy field coherence that what Mary had taught was not superstition, but sophisticated technology for consciousness development that religion had suppressed and science had ignored. The church responded as Mary had predicted, declaring the Testament a forgery and warning the faithful against practices that led to demon possession disguised as spiritual awakening. But the condemnation had no power over those who had already tasted what the practices offered, who had felt the dragon stirring within them, and who understood that what the church called demonic was actually the suppressed feminine divine that patriarchy had always feared, because it could not be controlled through the mechanisms of guilt and external authority that kept believers dependent on institutional mediation. Sophia spent her remaining years traveling to sites across the world where the dragon bloodline had been preserved in various forms, finding communities in China where women practiced qigong, specifically designed to activate the dragon consciousness. Temples in India, where goddesses depicted with serpents represented the same kundalini energy that Mary had worked with. Sacred sites in Peru, where the serpent gods taught similar mysteries. She documented how the dragon tradition had survived globally despite systematic attempts to erase it, how it had been encoded in myths and symbols and practices that appeared unrelated, but that all pointed to the same fundamental teaching, that human consciousness was designed to evolve through activation of energies that connected earth and sky, matter and spirit, feminine and masculine, into integrated wholeness. In her final testimony, written as illness consumed her body, but left her consciousness blazing with the dragon fire that she had spent her life learning to cultivate, Sophia returned to the cave where she had first discovered Mary's testament and added her own words to the record. She wrote that the bloodline Mary had described was not exclusive to biological descendants, but could be activated in anyone willing to do the work. That the dragon consciousness was part of the collective human inheritance waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to undergo the initiations and surrender to the transformation that burned away everything false and revealed what was eternal. Mary Magdalene was erased from the story, Sophia wrote, but she could not be destroyed because she encoded her teaching in bloodlines that carried it forward through genetics and in practices that carried it forward through transmission from teacher to student. The Dragon Mothers rise again, not as historical reconstruction but as contemporary manifestation, women and men who remember that the dragon was never the enemy but always the teacher, that the serpent in Eden offered not poison but medicine, that the bloodline they tried to erase flows still in those who choose to activate it, proving that no suppression is permanent and no truth can be permanently buried, that what was hidden will be revealed when the time is right, and that time is now. The age when the dragon bloodline claims its inheritance and the sacred marriage that Mary and Jesus demonstrated becomes not rare exception, but common possibility. The union within each consciousness of all that has been split, all that has been denied, all that has been suppressed rising now to reclaim its rightful place, the feminine divine returning not as subordinate, but as equal, not as servant, but as partner. The dragon and the Christ united as they were always meant to be, as Mary taught. They could be, as the bloodline proves they are in all who carry the mark and who choose to awaken what sleeps within. The consciousness that predates religions and will survive them, the wisdom that patriarchy could suppress but never destroy, the bloodline they erased from history. But that writes itself back into the present through every woman and every man who feels the dragon stirring and who has the courage to let it rise. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.